Okay. I know that people will still join us along the way. So good evening to everybody. This is Nikki, a public programs manager at Randall's Island. Thank you for joining us tonight in our third session of our Lit Club, where we're focusing on Vesper flights. And Elizabeth is back with us as host, so we're really happy about that. And then we also have two other individuals who'll be joining us this evening to round out the discussion. So I just want to give you a little bit about both of them. First, Ciara, many of you may know Ciara. She is our urban farm manager on Randall's Island. And just a little background, a lifelong New Yorker. She's committed to growing food and educational spaces in New York City. She's farmed at the Queens County Farm Museum. She's taught on Brooklyn Grange rooftop farms, managed Harlem Grown's network of 12 agricultural facilities, and has for the past 2 years managed our farm on Randall's Island. She's endlessly interested in engaging folks in learning and discussions around the intersections of farming, justice, sustainability, and our urban landscape. And she's gonna tell you a little bit more about our farm, so I'll leave her to do that. Steve Burnett has joined us. Thank you, Steve, from upstate New York. And after a career in marketing and design, which he built from the farm from scratch, it's his farm's 15th year in operation, and it grows organic vegetables, fruits, and berries. They also raise cattle, pigs, and poultry. And the Burnett farm is a mountain farm in the Catskills that, like at a farm of 150 years ago, except for the electric, diesel, and plastics. The farm produces and preserves what they need to live. And Steve is an artist and has a radio show and is very involved in the community and work there. So I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, thank you again for joining us and for navigating through this tonight. So again, welcome everybody.
Thank you, Nikki. And as Nikki said, this is our third conversation around Helen McDonald's book, Vesper Flights. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, and I know there are a few of you, I wanted to tell you that the title comes from the flight of swifts, who, as Helen writes, as if they're called by a bell or a call, rise higher and higher until they disappear from view. These ascents are called Vesper flights. After the Latin Vesper for evening, Vespers are evening devotionals at the end of the day, usually the most solemn. And as Helen McDonald said, I always thought Vesper flights, the most beautiful phrase. Helen McDonald writes about nature, science, and literature. Her voice and her words are poetic. This morning, at a very early hour when I got up, I pulled a copy of Wendell Berry's book off the shelf and read some of his poetry. The book is titled A Small Porch, and it includes his essay in the presence of nature in the natural world, a long conversation. And I pulled down a collection of Donald Hall's poetry and read some of his poems written at Eagle Pond Farm in New Hampshire. What is it about farming, nature, and poetry? Tonight, we have Steve Burnett, a farmer, an artist, an explorer, and a creative, and Ciara, who is the person who manages the urban farm on Randall's Island. And if you didn't know there was an urban farm on Randall's Island, or if you've never been there, I would love to invite you to join me there this summer. Preparing for tonight, I thought another Zoom meeting, another talking heads asking questions and answering questions. I thought, why not show images of farming and the natural world? And I thought, why not read Helen McDonald's exquisite words and let Steve and Ciara reflect on her words? Tilling, Helen McDonald. Tilling, as you know, is simply turning over and breaking up the soil. Exactly how deep you till and how fine you break up the soil depends. So we're going to begin on Randall's Island, learning about an urban farm. And then we're going upstate to Steve's magnificent farm there. And then I will read and they will reflect. An urban farm and a rural farm, an evening of poetry. So Ciara, let's begin on Randall's Island.
Sure thing. Nikki, if you're available to share some photos just as I give an introduction, that would be wonderful. So hi everyone, it's so wonderful to be with you all this evening. As Elizabeth and Nikki both said, I'm Ciara. I also go by Farmer C, like pharmacy, and I am the farm manager on Randall's Island. We have it's about a 1 acre farm. There we go. There's a picture. It's always better to tell the story with some photos. We are primarily an educational farm. We run field trips for students in our neighborhood, which includes the South Bronx and East Harlem and other areas of New York City. We bring the students to the farm to engage in hands-on education around growing food, eating healthy food, composting, tending to chickens, everything of the sort, and it relates to what they're learning in the classroom. I think I want to keep that short because I'm going to tell stories as I go that relate directly to the urban farm with other photos. But I just wanted to kind of give you that background of it being an educational space for young New Yorkers.
Steve?
Well, Nikki gave a good introduction to our farm up here. This is a pretty wild place. And because it's a literary conversation we're having tonight, I'm having a drink. And the ice cubes, because I'm a frugal Scotsman by heritage, are icicles that I pulled off the roof. So to all of you good people out there that have to pull it out of a refrigerator, this is part of the self-sustaining effort that goes on at Burnett Farms.
So can you tell us what you're having for a drink though, Steve? Because you probably made some of the ingredients.
Yeah, I'm having a Pellegrino orange and vodka. It's a kind of a screwdriver. So let me give you a quick introduction to the farm this way. Our farm has a creation myth, and it goes back 15 years, as Nikki said. I came up here from the city and not knowing a thing about farming, and I decided to get a vegetable farm going on top of our mountain. This is a mountain farm. And I started up, and the old timers, they came up to me. They would not even look me in the eye. They were so ashamed of me. They said, "Burnett, we understand you're coming up here to start a vegetable farm. You need to know something. This is a rocky part of the world, and where you are is the rockiest. Vegetable farming is not part of our DNA up here. We need you to know what we're calling you. We're calling you our cityite." And they were right. I was from the city and I was an idiot. So a few years later, they came back and they would like look me in the eye and they said, "Burnett, we've been watching you. You've been working hard. So we're dropping the city part. You're just our idiot." And they were right again. I was working very hard and I was still an idiot. It took me about 5 years to figure out how to farm up here. And we did. My wife and I did figure it out. This is a very difficult place to grow vegetables. We get about a third of the time, we only get 90 days of frost free, which is just silly to grow anything. So we have greenhouses and we structured the land that we grow on in freestanding raised beds that pick up passive solar and address the drainage issues up here. But I would not recommend what we've done to anybody that wants to start farming. We basically made all of the soil that we grow with. That's kind of an introduction to farming. If you want to know any more, I'll give you one more bit of advice. In farming, unlike so many other things in this fast-paced world, when you mess it up, you have to wait a year to try it again. And it's got both a good and a bad side to that. It allows you to reflect and to think, which is a leisure product that doesn't exist too much anymore. But it is a year. And so you've got to really make a commitment that you're going to stay in the game for a long time because the learning curve is long. Isn't that right? Isn't that right, Ciara?
I do love that you say that. I always, yeah, the moment a mistake is made, I often joke, but in all seriousness, that we now have a year to reflect on that very mistake and come up with a solution. It's sometimes nice to have a year to come up with a solution, but it's also frustrating to not be able to fix something any quicker.
Yeah, it's got both sides of that for sure.
Well, shall I read the first? I'm going to read from a chapter called Swans Upping. You move through a landscape thick with narratives handed to you by others, and what you read from the banks as you pass is part of what you choose to believe about your nation and who you are. You might see only Dunkirk boats and lines in the air carved by ghostly Spitfires. You might see leisurely 18th century landscapes in the loose herd of cattle standing in the river. But you might see there too the ghosts of forgotten farm workers, or feel fellowship with a woman eating sandwiches from a plastic packet on a bench. Steve, Sarah?
So I'll jump in. We're at 2,200 feet. So as I said, it's a mountain farm, and it's been farmed before. When I started to turn it around, most of it that I thought was farm had gone back to forest. So I had to dig out a lot of trees to get things going. But I kept this sort of perimeter of forest around our growing area, and bent over. The lovely thing about an organic farm as opposed to industrial farming is you see people on the landscape. To Elizabeth's point on the literary reference, and straightening up and looking around and saying to myself, as I often do, what a beautiful workspace I have. You do, because you pick things up out of the dirt, things that were there from people that ran cattle and from people that grew corn. It's these remnants and those ghosts and the hand of people that had been there before come up. And so, there are very few places left in America anyway that you farm that you don't have touchstones to the history of people that in their labors have gone through either a very miserable or an interesting life.
Sarah, did you want to reflect?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if it's worth pulling up more pictures. I have a lot. Well, Nikki, why don't you pull some up of just people and places off island, perhaps, or on island? It doesn't matter.
Okay.
And I'm going to just repeat the start of the passage you read and respond to that specifically. So it's, you move through, I do have it in front of me as well. You move through landscape thick with narratives handed to you by others. And what you read from the banks as you pass is part of what you choose to believe about your nation and who you are. When I read that, I immediately thought, this is a very urban perspective perhaps, but of the narratives that are handed down based on, to all of us based on where we grow up and what exists within our neighborhood and the schools that we go to, the restaurants we go to, and how that can define a life path for all of our young people. And as an educator, as a farmer, as a person in New York City, I often think about the narratives that that our kids are experiencing in their lives, and then my own, and how to find connection in those differing narratives, perhaps, in the space that is natural, outdoors, this farm space. We all can connect on food, and we do that by bringing students with all different narratives that have been handed to them into the space of community and growth. I think I'll leave that there.
So since it's winter, and Steve, you said how many feet of snow do you have where you are?
We're about 3 feet.
So I'm going to read from the chapter entitled Winter Woods. So often we think of mindfulness, of existing purely in the present moment as a spiritual goal. But winter woods teach me something else, the importance of thinking about history, They were able to show you the last 5 hours, the last 5 days, the last 5 centuries, all at once. Their wood and soil and rotting leaves, the crystal fur of hoarfrost, and the melting of overnight snow. But they are also places of different time frames. In them, potentiality crackles in the winter air.
That's so lovely. Winter in the Catskills at this elevation is hibernation. And while most everything, except for a few birds and some shadows and some wonderful patterns on the snow, there's very little going on that you can see. However, this is a fascinating thing, and I'll make it quick. Because our season is so short, when Mother Nature heaves herself onto our land, the vegetables know they have to do their work very quickly, and they sugar themselves in ways that are unusual. Carrots end up tasting like candy, and cucumbers taste like melons. While that's going on, our trees are also photosynthesizing and making their sugars. And right now, one of the most fascinating things about being up here on this farm is that the maple trees, all summer long, all 7 days of it, were producing sugars that they sent down into their roots. And under all of that snow, those roots wrapped around all of our rocks are holding sugars. And in the late winter, when the temperatures start to rise above freezing, the sap gets pumped back up into the trees to give energy to the buds that come out and produce food for the next winter. We tap that sap. And I wish that everybody, if they haven't already, can, before their end, taste the sap that comes out of a tree that's been hibernating all winter long among those rocks, because there's a sweetness to it that you really have to be quiet to, and you have to listen to it to come up. There's about 40 gallons of sap to 1 gallon of syrup. But there's a crispness, the sort of flavor that you would get out of squeezing water from a rock. And that flavor is really the taste of our view of winter up here. That's all I have to say about winter.
Sarah, would you like to?
That was beautiful, Steve. Thanks for kind of going into a little bit of the plant side of things. I think I often, since I'm right now just in the planning mode of winter, I forget that it can also be a time of hibernation, both for the farmer and what we farm and what's around us. And I think it's such an important time for relaxation and acknowledging what can and can't be done, given the natural world, right? With what, if there's snow on the ground, I cannot plant anything successfully at this time. And so what can I do but take a moment to step back, assess, and breathe, which in a lot of ways is kind of what you're describing around these plants, is prepping for the next season in whatever way is necessary. If that's hibernating, if it's preparing underground, freezing, anything like that. So I think we actually respond similarly.
Yeah, spot on. Well said.
This is from the chapter entitled Ashes. Increasingly, knowing your surroundings, recognizing the species of animals and plants around you, means opening yourself to constant grief. Virulent tree diseases hit the headlines, but smaller, less visible disappearances happen all the time. The flycatchers that nested in my neighborhood a decade ago have vanished. Meadows in my hometown that were full of all kinds of life have become housing developments full of nothing but our own. People of a certain age tend to look back at the things that have gone, the shop you used as a kid that closed, the rooms that become a memory. But those small personal disappearances, however poignant, are not the same as losing biodiversity. Changes to city skylines are not the same as acres of beetle-blasted trees, though they are caught up in stories about themselves. Trees are not ever just about us. they support complex and interdependent communities of life. And as forests slowly become less diverse, the world loses more than simply trees.
Well, you know, that notion just takes my breath away, the loss and extinction. We notice it here that the insect populations, fireflies and bees have diminished so much. And we've noticed pattern changes in overall type and volume diminishing of bird migrations. What happens is when you change the habitat, you change the behavior of everything in it, and it's happening for sure. We see it here on the farm. But I'll say this: what remains, and maybe what the purpose of a farm like this is, and all of us that farm, is that with the stewardship, things that are here thrive. You will notice the miracle of what happens when you just pay attention to anything at any stage. When you give it what it wants and needs, it responds. And with a world that is diminishing, when everything is being taken away, and then you're on a farm where you are sustainably and correctly balancing and growing things, and you see how things thrive, you're just reminded of maybe what the goodness of farming is, and the badness of a world and its appetites that are unsustainable. Okay, I'm done with myself now.
Sarah?
This passage has me thinking of a lot of different things. Let's see if I could be coherent in how I express this. First and foremost is just thinking about the difference between grief when there's a natural occurrence, and thinking specifically about the farm. And Nikki, if you're able, you could pull up the pictures I direct messaged you. So I think I direct messaged you. Let's see if you get these pictures. So there's certain, and Steve even mentioned this earlier, there's always grief. You make a mistake and that's grief in and of itself, or not you're making the mistake, but you have a pest and you can't take care of it. Anyway, so there's that alongside the grief experienced, the words here that are used as the changes to the city skyline. And as a native New Yorker, I've seen the skyline change in the city, and as a farmer, I see the changes in the natural world regularly in my day to day, and it is a different feeling. And in a lot of ways, I think the natural grief is easier because there's reasoning behind it that feels outside of my control. Not that I control the New York City skyline either, but but it does feel, it's outside of the human control. And so if you could pull up the picture of the raccoon, might as well throw in a fun story. It's not fun, it's sad, but this is just, since we're talking about grief, a moment where every student that I worked with in Harlem cried was the day that all 12 of our chickens were killed by a raccoon. This is when I was working at another nonprofit organization based in Central Harlem. And this is the day after the massacre. But we had, come up to the farm on an early summer day for summer camp, and we encountered all 12 birds dead. And for city kids who had just formed relationships with these animals, that was really big. That was something that we all needed to grieve together. We happened to catch this picture, which I thought was pretty neat. We still don't know how the raccoon got in, but it was just a moment of learning about the life cycle with the students in a very tangible way. That I think is harder to explain when you're thinking about these human powered changes. And I'd go into anything, the city skyline, right? New buildings popping up in certain neighborhoods, new restaurants, anything like that, that's outside of our control in some ways. So
So this is from the chapter, Nothing Like a Pig. When animals become so rare that their impact on humans is negligible, their ability to generate new meanings lessens, and it is then that they come to stand for another human notion, our moral failings and our relationship to the natural world. The world has lost half its wildlife in my own lifetime. Climate change, habitat loss, pollution, pesticides, and persecution have meant that vertebrate species are dying out over 100 times as fast as they would in a world without humans. The single boar appearing from behind the trees felt like a token of hope. It made me wonder if our damage to the natural world might not be irreversible, that creatures that are endangered or locally extinct might one day reappear. Sierra, that's sort of what you were just, yeah. Go ahead.
I love that picture up there right now of Christy on one of our sows who's about ready to give birth. You know, that chapter in the, or that story in the book, which is her first, I guess, introduction to a wild boar. There isn't a pig, if you are to release it from its habitat, which is confined, if you will, or civilized, in a few weeks, it will start to develop behaviors and attributes that it didn't have when it was being touched by people. Its tusks will grow, its hair will thicken, its muscles will tighten. All sorts of interesting metamorphoses go on. And yes, it is beyond my comprehension what's going on with these extinctions in our natural world. But I have certain things certainly that give me hope. And one is that there is in all living things an incredible and somewhat hidden resource to adapt to conditions. And certainly humans have that, maybe to too much of a successful degree. But one thing is for sure is the world changes, and the conditions that we grew up with and consider necessary for survival change. The other world, the natural world, is adapting, and it's adapting without really caring too much about humans. And you know, there are a lot of futurists that think that while the world is changing and we are not, that we are on our own path to extinction, the world will go on, and all sorts of life forms that exist now and will be made in these new habitats will come on. But that force of life on the planet is some form of great reassurance to me. And I see it on our farm, how adaptive and strong the natural world is, given all of the problems that it has to deal with. I'm done.
Okay. Sierra, would you like to reflect on that? We lost?
I'm sorry. I think I'm going to sit with that one and then reflect on the next.
Okay. So this is from In Spite of Prisons. We live in a world of distracting, endless, glowing screens. And even so, these shining tiny beacons retain an allure that draws people out in droves to stand and wonder. It is hard in these days of ecological rumination to find ways to reconnect people to a natural world more commonly encountered on television and video than in its living reality. The greatest magic of these shining beacons that draw people out in hordes to stand and wonder is that it cannot be meaningfully captured on film. Glowworms are part of our hidden countryside. Like Marvel's living lamps, they are still able to guide distracted wanderers.
Yeah. Where to begin with that one? Sierra, why don't you take that on?
I'm ready to. Fantastic. And Nikki pulled up a fantastic picture from this past summer when we were unable to run formal education programs, but our informal education program, inviting people from the community who happen to be on Randall's Island at the playground next door or walking the pathways, when they happen to pass by and see that we had food growing and chickens, they ended up visiting almost every weekend. So I got to know the 3 children in this picture fairly well. And I think everything we do on Randall's Island, not only the farm, but certainly at the farm, is exactly that. It's taking kids and adults, anyone in New York City who is often looking at the world through a screen, especially now, and we're providing a natural space. We're providing outdoor space and education around that, and simply time and dedication to this. You know, I took time out of my day to teach these kids about the chickens, even in an informal way. And that's really important, because in you can't learn about chickens in the same way that online or through a movie in the same way that you will in person. And same thing around food, right? You can't know what an orange carrot and a purple carrot taste like, or if they taste different, unless you try it. And we're able to offer that to thousands of students a year in New York City who really otherwise wouldn't easily have access to, at least not those 2 color carrots, but also to a lot of healthy produce. And I'm just going to go ahead and share a couple of anecdotes that make me smile about the work that we do. Last year, when we hosted a kindergarten class, and often kindergarten is that the first year we're seeing students. They haven't been to the farm before, and many New York City kids haven't been to a farm before at all. So it's all new. They've read about it in books, they've seen it in TV shows, they've heard, about it. And I was walking a bunch of these 5 and 6-year-olds into the farm, and I said, does anyone know why we call it an urban farm? And that's a hard question, that's not part of the vocabulary yet in kindergarten. And one girl gets really excited and says, oh, is it because you grow herbs? And that same student, since I brought up the carrots, that same student later on, as part of all of our classes, we harvest with the students and we sit around a table. And, pre-COVID, we would teach cooking, cutting lessons and all of that. And then we get to taste. And she and all of her friends harvested the different color carrots. We grow over 200 varieties of crops on our 1 acre, 100 raised bed space. So it's a lot of variety. She harvested those 2 carrots and she raised her hand and she said, Farmer C, are these carrots going to taste the same or different? And I said, well, why don't you tell me? Why don't we all try together and we find out? That's a great experiment. And we did that. She found out. And later on, when we circled up in the big group, about 30 kids of her friends, I asked everyone to share something that was exciting, something that they learned in their time. And she was the most talkative of the group, but once again, she raises her hand and she says, and I just remember it so clearly, it was so wonderful. She says, well, I asked the very important question of, will the orange carrot taste the same as the purple carrot, or will it taste different? And I found out that actually they really just taste mostly the same. And I know that because I asked that question. And I just think that's so powerful. And that's what we're doing, not only on the urban farm, but with our natural areas department that teaches in the wetlands and all about, what else is happening in the natural world on our island. For a kid to be able to have a tangible moment outside and learn like that, that's not something that can be learned in the classroom in the same way.
So shouldn't all New York City school children be exposed to something like this urban farm? I mean, how many are?
Someone else here might actually have numbers for you, but it is thousands of students. And I can tell you, having, been working in this space for a number of years, it's certainly growing, and so many more students are having access to this. I know, as a kid in New York City, I did not have access to this type of program, years ago. And so it's becoming more of the norm. Nutrition education is becoming more of the norm as well And that's often combined with school garden education.
Mhm.
That isn't quite the same as what we do on the island though, because we are a much bigger, we're very small for a farm. In comparison to Steve's farm, we're certainly an urban farm, but we really provide the diversity that a small school garden cannot. We're able to grow a lot more. We're able to have more chickens. I see a comment in there. The Battery Urban Farm is wonderful. They do similar work to us as well. And right, they will, work with Brooklyn students and Lower Manhattan students, and we're working with Bronx and Upper Manhattan and Harlem students, and then our neighbors in Queens as well. We're at such a nexus of so many different neighborhoods, which is really fantastic for engaging a lot of people.
That's
Steve,
so beautifully said.
yeah, and Steve, aren't you working with students as well and children?
Oh, we invite anybody that wants to come by, and we help a lot of sort of challenged kids and young kids. I like working with them. I'm one of them. Sierra, that was so beautiful, and it reminds me of what I was reminded of reading the book, and that is that's prayer. And I'm not attaching any religious significance to prayer, but I'm defining it this way: when you pay attention, when you focus yourself and exclude everything else on an idea, an event, a belief, or a proposition, something really remarkable happens. And what you've described with your students and that transformation, when they and their natural curiosity start that focus, that form of prayer, it is something that is absolutely necessary and I think is a self-apparent truth in the farming situation, where our natural curiosity is just so vital with young people to be in a state of joy and witnessing all of the miracles. And I love hearing your story about how you've seen evidence of that happening. It's just lovely. Didn't mean to get too preachy there, but good stuff.
So now we're going to go to Turkles Park. We so often think of the past as something like a nature reserve, a discrete, bounded place we can visit in our imaginations to make us feel better. I wonder how we could learn to recognize that the past is always working on us and through us, and that diversity in all its forms, human and natural, is strength. The messy stretches of species-rich vegetation with all their attendant invertebrate life are better, just better, than the eerie, impoverished silence of modern planting schemes and fields. I wonder how we might learn to align our aesthetic and moral landscapes to fit that intuition. I think of the meadows. Those clouds of butterflies have met with local extinction, but held in that soil is a bank of seeds that will hang on. They will hang on for a long time. And when I drive past the fence these days, staring out at 50 miles an hour, I know that I know what I am looking for beyond the fence is a place that draws me, because it exists neither wholly in the past nor in the present, but is caught in a space in between. And that space is a place which gestures toward the future and whose little hurts are hope.
It's such a lovely thought. The power in diversity. The first reaction everybody has to something unknown is to say no, to run away, to be afraid. It takes a good teacher and a guide to get them through that fear and let them see the beauty in diversity. That's one of the great things about farming, is that there's a name that ultimately you come very personally aware of to all of the different moving parts of a farm. You find that weeds are not just weeds; they have a purpose. You don't want to kill them all. They have a season. You find that what you might have been afraid of in a different situation is something that is going to be your ally. You find that what it is that you thought would make you weak is a paradoxical strength in other situations. Diversity in farming becomes a philosophical bedfellow, and I think the lessons there are so strong and apparent when it comes to us as a people, on how necessary, even if we don't understand, even if there is a tinge of the alien, to accept the fact that, you know, they are part of this incredible, diverse, and through that strong world that we live in. And you don't have to understand something to accept it and to take joy in its difference. I think that's, for farming, one of the things that makes most farmers extremely humble, in recognizing that there's just a lot out there you're never going to get, but you understand that it's necessary and then consequently good. Okay, done.
That's lovely, Steve. Yeah, I guess to build upon that, thinking about, yeah, diversity of plants and that relating, I don't know if this is going to be coherent, we'll see, that relating to people and to spaces and to how we engage with each other is, yeah, I love that way of thinking. I think I said this earlier, but on the urban farm, we grow over 200 varieties of crops. So that means we're growing over 200 different fruits or vegetables in that one space. And part of that is because that's a very sustainable model of agriculture. We're not certified organic, but in order to, you know, maintain a biologically diverse space and support all of our natural habitat, that's a wonderful way of doing it. Another reason we do that on Randall's Island is to engage with as many cultures as possible and with as many of our visitors as possible. And we all know New York City is a microcosm of the world, right? Just filled with so many cultures. And we plant fruits and vegetables that are going to mean something to the people that come through our farm. So I think, Nikki, if you could go to the rice photos, one of the most unique crops we grow is rice, and this is one example of a culturally relevant crop that we grow. And I'm using rice because it's culturally relevant to so many people. If places don't grow it, you still eat it, no matter where you're from, for all intents and purposes. And we run an education program where kids are involved in planting the rice, harvesting the rice, and then actually eating rice from around the world. This is a picture, actually, once again, this summer, an informal education opportunity where a family showed up and was interested in what we're doing, and we ended up harvesting the rice with kids that happened to be visiting the park. So that's what happens during COVID. If I don't have students, then I just have to find students, and that's what happened this year. And if you could go to the indoor rice picture, I of course naturally have a story. Just a quick, perfect. So this is at last year's Rice Festival where we invited students in. In this room, they harvested the rice and I gave them an introduction. And in another room, they went around the space with fake passports, with little paper passports. And we had restaurants donate food representing rice dishes from around the world. And as they went to the stations, they got stickers or stamps of the flag of the country or the region where the rice was from. And one kid in this room, when I said, you know, we grow rice from all around the world, can you name a rice dish that you eat at home? And he raised his hand and he says, I bet you don't have my rice here. And I was like, you name it, let's see. And he said biryani, and his family is from India. And lo and behold, I was lucky, but we did have biryani in the other room, and we had an Indian restaurant partnering with us. But we think about the cultures and the ethnicities of the kids that we work with right over the bridge in Harlem and the Bronx and Queens, and we represent that in our space alongside those kids, so that when these students come to the farm or when they participate in these programs, they can see themselves there and they can find joy in understanding, and they can find those relationships. It's easier to connect to something you know. And in a city, when you haven't been to a farm before, you're not going to connect to the rice on the plant, but you will connect to the rice dish that you eat at home regularly with your family. So I think that answered, I think that was a reflection.
So have you ever had children say they want to grow up and be a farmer? Do they ever ask about being a farmer?
You know, it depends on the age, right? We've certainly got a lot of kids who think they're all, I call them farmer the moment they walk through the farm, so they might be confused that they're already farmers. Yes, we have students. I'd say that's not necessarily, that's not necessarily what we're doing, right? That's not our goal, and that's not necessarily what we're seeing often. But I do find that people are more invested in their communities, and I'm thinking more back to the older students that I've worked with in the past in New York City. When I'm working with kindergarteners, we're excited when they're identifying the carrots and they're getting excited to pet a chicken, right? And they want to come back. That's what's important to us. And I'd say what is most exciting for me at Randall's Island is when I host an educational program, an organized program with students, and then they come back on the weekend with their family to show their parents what they learned in the class. And I'd say one of the big successes of this year, we had virtual lessons, which really didn't feel so great. It's hard to connect to second graders virtually about farming. And even then we had a family come to us for the first time on a weekend after the virtual lesson, so that their daughter could see the space that they virtually toured. That I think is the best thing that happens in terms of, you know, just getting that energy, seeing that energy and seeing them return is of the utmost importance. And where they take it, it just means that they're inspired in some way.
Steve, when did you start defining yourself as a farmer? And, you know, since you left you were working in New York, you were working internationally.
Yeah. I guess I defined myself as a farmer when I first sold something I grew on the farm. that made me a farmer. It's a wonderful idea to define yourself as somebody who, particularly an organic farmer, who through their labors and through the process of nurturing comes up with food that can nourish and make people happy and sustain them. I guess I became that farmer when I started to recognize that direct line between my labors and the result, and then the sharing of it, Elizabeth. That's something so lacking in so many careers, when the outcome of what you do is meaningfully shared and you can visibly see in the joy on people's faces, and then ultimately the health of those people, a direct consequence to what you've so suffered through. And believe me, organic farming on a small scale is not for everybody. It is just unmitigated labor, which is why so many people left it 150 years ago. It's a romantic ideal, but it gets down to really hard work. And you know, the attrition level of startup organic farmers is about 2 years. It's too much work, it's too much money. They don't get enough back from it. So to be a farmer on the scale that I'm a farmer is something that you have to have your heart in, and you really have to be smart to scale it up to a point where you can make a living at it. But I became a farmer when I recognized just how beautiful the labor to the mouth, if you will, was all about.
And also, Steve, can I ask you, because we had, when we talked with Andrew Farnsworth about the chapter in the book on high rise, and when he took Helen McDonald up on top of the Empire State Building, but she mentioned something about it was like being in a high rise building is like being in a submersible. And maybe you are also an explorer, and I know you've spent a lot of time in submarines at the bottom of the ocean. So do you see farming as exploration in some ways?
At the Explorers Club, which I'm a member of, we define adventure as the byproduct of an ill-planned expedition. And farming for me has been just nothing but an adventure. You know, the other thing, Elizabeth, was that in my professional career in the city, we designed, you know, financial planning software for all of the biggies that had, you know, hundreds of thousands of interdependent moving parts. I gave all of that up to, without knowing anything, farm. And I've got to tell you and everybody else that the complexity and the beauty of farming has, for me, in my experience, in my career, in my life, just completely redefined how intricate, harmonic, and extraordinary our natural world is. Do I miss exploring? I still do a little bit of that, but I wake up every day and I have the privilege of witnessing miracles, of having what every human craves, which is meaningful problems to solve. And you know, out of that, the witnessing and the doing of real work and figuring stuff out that there seemingly is no answer to, comes purpose. And that is what's so lacking, and what farming can bring to people is this sense of purpose through their labor and witnessing what's in front of them. So I don't, the exploration stuff, you know, I've got a great number of stories and wonders from that, but it was all the sort of stuff that you'd share around a drink. And what I'm doing in farming is the great stuff that you share around a table.
Well, I think we just have a few minutes. I don't know if we have a couple of questions, if anyone would like to ask a question in the chat. I think this has just been such an interesting conversation. I love your reflections on Helen McDonald's writing have been just wonderful.
We're happy to take questions. If anyone wants to put them in the chat, that would be great. And I can read them back to Steve and Ciara.
And when does the urban farm, when in the spring? So can you tell us when it will open, actually, when people could actually visit?
Yeah, I'd say consistently starting in April will be open. For folks who tend to come to the island, I always think it's worth it to walk in that direction, because if the gates are open, then everyone is more than welcome to come in. But in April, we'll be consistently open on weekends as well, with, you know, open days. We'll certainly be there.
Okay, a couple of questions. First, did either of you farm as children, or was this an adult discovery for you both?
That's a good question. Oh, Anne, nice. I did not farm as a child. I grew up in Queens, and my first farming, well, I visited the Queens County Farm Museum when I was in kindergarten, and I milked a cow. And then I remembered that I had done that, and in high school, I had an internship at the Queens County Farm Museum, mostly because of that memory and my desire to study environmental studies. And that's what began my journey.
I had great-grandparents and grandparents and relatives that farmed in Iowa and Missouri. I would touch that during the summer as a kid, but I ran away from that to wear an Armani suit and Ferragamo shoes and play that game. When I got into it, I was really a blank slate. I had a family history of it, which meant nothing in terms of practical knowledge, but I really didn't know a thing.
And how do you, well, I guess you've sort of told us, Steve, how you learn farming. I mean, you have to sort of be an apprentice and then just start. Yeah.
The work teaches you. It's an amazing process, and it really does take time, and you have to be aware and remember and apply. But the whole thing about learning anything new, and particularly farming, is that you just have to do the work. And it sounds like just the old man, with the cane beating the kid. Do the work will teach you. But it's just, that's farming. And you can learn it. You can pick that up at any stage in your life.
And Steve, if you don't mind, could you just let us know, we have a question about if your family is as involved in the farm as you are.
I have two daughters. One teaches in New York City, and she, when I had her dig potatoes the first time, she kind of called them dirt balls and never went back to it. And her idea of nature is what happens between her front door and an Uber cab. I've got another daughter who's finishing her studies right now in college, who is enthralled and comes to the farm in the summer and does the work. Again, it's just not for everybody, but I have one daughter who is quite taken with it, and one daughter who, for good reasons, is not taken with it.
Thank you. And then we have another question from Carol. This is probably Ciara. Does the amount of cars passing over Randall's Island negatively affect the vegetables in any way?
That's such a good question. And I can't with confidence say much on that. What I can say is I focus more on soil health than the plants themselves. And so all of the soil, you can actually see in this picture, all of our soil was brought into the farm. So underneath all of those wood chips and in those beds, there's landscape fabric preventing our roots of those vegetables from reaching the city dirt that was beneath there, because there are high levels of lead throughout New York City from years of industry and it being used in gas. And you could see we're right under the Hellgate Bridge. So we focus most on ensuring that our soil is healthy, because if our soil is healthy, our plants will be too. The general day-to-day of traffic and anything like that won't affect the vegetables each season.
I think that's about it for questions. If anybody has any last.
I see a good question. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Is there an age limit to becoming a farmer, would we say? And I would just like to say that if any of you have not heard of this organization, the National Young Farmers Coalition is an organization nationwide that supports young farmers. And we often have these conversations because for them, young does not mean age at all, but rather I think it's 10 years or less of farming experience. So anyone can be young at the table of the National Young Farmers Coalition. And so in that sense, absolutely not. And I think in any sense, you can become a farmer whenever you want to become a farmer and whenever you can access the land or grow your own food. And if you grow something on your windowsill, I'll call you a farmer because I'm an herbalist.
Okay, one last one from Doris for Steve. Most people throw away, and I'm not sure I'm even pronouncing this correctly, purslane, the edible weed. Could you share with us the benefits of eating it?
Which weed is that?
Purslane, Purslane.
Well, I'm sure I've inhaled it or eaten it, but I'm not familiar with that. So I'm going to pass that one off to Ciara.
Ciara?
I can answer.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have purposefully grown purslane, and ever since we purposefully grow it, we now grow it accidentally because it does grow as a weed, and our park visitors love it. It lowers cholesterol, and folks who grew it. Many of our visitors who grew it where I don't know where people grow purslane, but not in New York typically, would come to the farm and get super excited to see it. A lot of people put it in smoothies. I believe it lowers cholesterol.
We're gonna have a run at the farm now. Thank you all. Elizabeth, any last words? Anybody?
No, we have another program on the 25th. We are just confirming a very interesting speaker or someone that I'll be in conversation with. So we'll post that on the website. But just Ciara and Steve, thank you. Really interesting conversation. And I think you know, I can't wait for the urban farm to open on Randall's Island in April. And Steve, I hope to be able to come and visit your farm. I've wanted to do that for the last few summers. Perhaps you can bring some children from Randall's Island up for the afternoon. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you all very much, Elizabeth, Ciara, and Steve. Thank you. We really, really appreciate it. It was a wonderful discussion. And we invite you all to come out at any point to the island. And please watch our website because we are really invested in getting things going as soon as it's warm enough for everyone to come out. So please keep checking our events calendar and postings. And we hope to see you on the farm and on the rest of the island as well. So have a good night and we hope to see you in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone. Please stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.